The fallacy of separating Mosaic law from its observances. The Mosaic law was a legal code given to the Israelites, and its rituals were an integral part of that code. It is illusory to imagine that one can keep the rituals of the law without keeping the law itself. Attempting to separate the two is an arbitrary and artificial distinction. The rituals were designed to be inseparable from the legal obedience required of the Israelites, and not standalone practices that could be observed in isolation from the rest of the law. They were to be observed with specific practices such as sacrifices and offerings at the temple. Since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, it is not possible to observe these practices in the way they were instructed. And moreover, as believers in Christ, we are called to walk in the freedom and grace that He has given us, rather than attempting to blend the teachings of Christ with incomplete or outdated practices. The yearly feast days were prophetic of Christ. However, when these feasts were fulfilled in Christ's sacrifice, His resurrection, ascension, and the day of Pentecost, there was no longer a need to continue the feasts. In fact, continuing to observe them would suggest a lack of belief in their fulfillment. We are now instructed to remember Christ's death through the observance of the Lord's Supper. Unlike the Mosaic feasts, the Lord's Supper is not prophetic but rather a commemoration of what Christ has already accomplished through His death and resurrection. Furthermore, trying to practice Mosaic rituals acknowledges the authority of the law over one, which contradicts the teachings of Paul. As believers in Christ, we are called to walk in freedom and grace, rather than trying to join the teachings of Christ with elements of the Mosaic law. Galatians 3:28 makes it clear that there is no distinction between Jewish and Gentile believers in Christ, so none should cling to old legalistic practices. Though it may be tempting for Jewish believers in Jesus to maintain cultural practices, we must be cautious not to do so at the expense of the gospel message. Mixing the Old and New covenants leads to confusion, division, and a distorted understanding of the gospel.